front of the house is already on the ground with the port lights in it that you can see.
Oops. All right. I was getting rid of a message here.
And then we have an overhead crane in this shop, so we were able to just have enough room to, we designed this lifting frame, which is engineered to support the weight and has straps running down the sides that you can't see that actually bolt through the bottom timber of the house, so that it wouldn't just rip the roof off when we picked it up. So it's actually picking it up from the bottom. So, and that's where we did the whole restoration of the house, was down on the shop floor. That way we could finish the deck structure and the decking and the rest of the boat.
So while Pete was doing that, I was crawling around on the inside, kind of picking about every 8 feet or 6 feet, picking whichever side of the boat was in better shape, and using a technique called spiling, where you make a pattern, and then I would duplicate that on the loft floor. So in that top left-hand picture, on the left-hand side of that upper picture, you see the pattern where I was picking up the shape of the boat. And then the battens on the right-hand side of that picture is me duplicating that, mirror imaging that side. And then we set up and built molds out of 2 layers of 3/4 inch plywood, which you see being assembled there down below. And then I went in and I set it up inside. And again, the boat was so limber, I could use that crane to pick up part of the boat and let us assemble that frame structure, and then set it back down onto the mold, and then use forklifts and porta powers to push the boat up into the mold section. And so you can see now those rib bands, those like 2x4s that are running underneath that picture on the top right. You can see the deck beams are in, so the boat's held together at the top sides. And then we put the mold in place, and we would fasten from the mold either into the rib bands or into the structural timbers that we already had there. So that was help hold the shape of the boat.
And made it symmetrical side to side again.
Yeah, more symmetrical.
That's a picture of the front of the house now on the building jig, and the large timber on the bottom and the large timber on the front. Basically, most of the front of the house was falling apart, but the interior view, which you're not seeing there, of the port lights and the window casings and whatnot, I knew I couldn't really take that apart without it, and it would never go back together the same way. And it's sort of grown into the shape that it had and the patina that it had, and so I really wanted to leave those window openings intact. So I sort of suspended them and rebuilt the top and bottom and all around them, just to sort of preserve the aesthetic of the original wheelhouse on the inside.
So the next parts of the hull, we're trying to get this, again, just trying to get strength back into the structure. We replaced the stern post, and then we made a decision. The keel had already had some damage to it. It was basically 2 different pieces of wood. The front, the boat had hit Alaska at some point, and like the first 20 feet of the stem had already been, or the keel had been replaced. When we were jacking the boat up to kind of get that shape, we realized that there was just no strength. Even though it was a big piece of wood left, it was just pretty shot. And so we ended up laminating a keel. I'm not usually a big fan of laminations, but we made that choice just to add strength, because we used 2-inch thick pieces of wood and epoxied and then screwed them together. So that's going to make a stiffer keel than even a sawn timber. And so we were kind of, your inner keel, I think, was like a 14 by probably 20-inch piece of wood. And then there's kind of a duplicate. So there are 2 really big timbers, and we were going to keep the inner keel. It's called a keelson. We were going to keep that. And then just to add that extra strength, we decided to go ahead and laminate. So then we had to hang the boat and then slide the new keel in. And then The stern is a horseshoe stern. It's built of timbers. It's all lifts. And so again, we kind of took the shape of the spile, took patterns, and I laid that out on the loft floor. And then we just built it a lift at a time and stacked it up. And so in the picture where the guy's standing there in the middle of it, it's actually upside down. And then on the right-hand side, that's some of the patterns of the layers. And then there it's all assembled inside the boat. So there you can see another one of the remaining timbers, the original timber, that's the horn timber, the piece with the hole in it, that dark piece. That hole is where the rudder shaft comes up through. And then so the back half, this type of boat, the last half of the boat is all sawn frames. It kind of helps. There was a big turntable that was metal, and that would hang there. So there was a lot of weight on that back part of the boat.
But by the turntable thing means it's a big mechanism used to stow, to deploy the sardine net, and used to help pull and restack the net back on deck. So that the part of the boat essentially is carrying the weight of that mechanism alone, and when the deck is covered with the net, it's a substantial load back there.
Yeah, the boat's about 20 feet wide. The turntable is just like what you'd think on a record player. It would spin around, like if you dropped the net off the back and you were retrieving over the side, that turntable would turn, and it had rollers on the back of it to help bring the net up. So there was, like he was saying, there was a lot of weight there. So then that's just does. And this is the sawn construction. It's called double buttocks. So there's 2 layers of wood that are bolted together, and so the breaks in the wood are at different spots. If you look in that bottom right-hand picture, that's a Pete Stein, and that you can see he's just playing this shape. And if you look just at the base of that curve there is a joint in the wood. And you can also see it in that picture where he's laying there with his devil horns. You can see, if you look, there's because it's painted with red lead in between, you can see little cross lines that go between them. I don't have a pointer.
Big alternating brakes.
Yeah, alternating brakes in the piece. So then it was time to frame. I think there's 62 pairs of bent frames. They're 3 by 4, 18 feet long. We had just enough wood. We probably had like 4 or 5 frames left over. So once we had everything set up, we would just take saws and we would just cut a section of the boat apart, kind of between where those molds were. So we'd start bending the frames at a mold and work towards each other, because every time you bend a frame on, it makes that basket a little bit stronger. So if we'd started just in the middle between molds, you'd get more deflection in the shape of the hull.
I think it's worth noting that of all the difficult wood to source for a boat construction project of this size, a traditional construction project at least, I think that this pile of oak was the hardest to find. Getting really straight grained, high quality white oak that is essentially cut for the specific purpose of doing this, so that it's very green and wet, and will then be steamable without breaking. It's very hard to put foundation a long time
to find that. Yeah, and that came from Kentucky. Berea College had a forestry program. And so because of that, we didn't have a lot of extra wood. So you can see in that top right-hand picture, all those marks on there. There's some dots and arrows and numbers. And we went through each piece. As we milled the frames, we kept looking at them. And so we were grading them as they went along. 1 dot was like the best. 2 dots was okay. So we had a whole different system there.
And the reason for that was, by looking in the larger picture there, the the closer to the stern, the tighter the bend, and the more likely the wood to break during the bending process. So the best pieces were saved for the tightest bends, and the ones that were less perfect or potentially going to crack were generally used in the shallower bend areas, like closer to the bow.
Right. Yeah, so we started in the middle where it was a little easier. So we started framing the 5th of July. We basically framed for a month. Yeah, so we start kind of towards the easy sections and work your way towards the back. And the bow, because it doesn't have quite as much shape, that you're kind of saving your worst timber for there. So you can see here on the picture on the right there, that's one of the ones that Pete was talking about towards the stern where there's more shape. We've actually have kind of a double bend in that one.
Can I cut in and ask you some of your questions from the chat?
Sure.
So for people who came in a little bit late, we agreed that you can put questions in the chat and I will throw them out to Pete and Tim. So one of the questions we got is, what species is the red colored wood used in the stern?
That's a tropical wood called Purple Heart. It's horrible. It's very heavy and splintery, but that's yeah, it's just it's a really durable, hard wood.
Cool. And then another question is, how are you making the decisions about what planks get saved and what planks don't? And how does that differ when you're looking at the boat itself versus the wheelhouse?
From the hull, it became pretty evident early on that only the really big stuff was going to stay. We probably could have saved some of the planking, but that's where economics comes in, because for us to have saved the planking, it was going to be much easier just to cut all the planking away and replank. It was going to be cheaper if we tried to pull planking off and kind of rehabilitate it and put it back on. It wouldn't have. It didn't make any sense to try and mesh that back in together. And even as we were cutting away pieces that looked good, as you cut it away, you realized
everything on the outside of, those frames, as you see, they go from the keel all the way up to the deck line. So, and the planking runs, longitudinally over it. So, very difficult to reframe a boat with planking intact. And the only way to do that is to actually drive the steamed frame from the deck level and pound it down through the shape of the boat, and that probably would have just destroyed what we were trying to save anyway.
Yeah.
And then one more question from early on in the talk: where did the Western Flyer sink, and where in Tacoma did she start out from?
She started out in the Western Boat Building Company, right down. It was just kind of down by, what was it, Docks? What's that restaurant? I don't know if there's somebody from Tacoma. No, it's up kind of right in front of Martin X is right across the street, but right in the middle of Tacoma, down just on the waterfront there. And she sank up in La Conner by the Three Bridges. If you're driving, if you're heading up to Mount Vernon, that area, and you drive, there's two twin bridges that come over. She was right there. You could see her from the highway.
La Conner is a slough full of one of the local rivers still.
Right.
So
yeah, every tide change, you got a new dose of silt coming through.
Cool. Okay, continue on. I'm going to save the questions that are in the chat now for a little.
Okay, sounds good. So then the next thing to do was to put the ceiling in. We decided to put the ceiling in because trying to push these like 2-inch thick timber, so trying to push them out without the ability to clamp was going to be really difficult. So we put the ceiling in first just to make it more convenient plank, and then and that ceiling, again, that's just a liner and helps strengthen the boat. It's not corked or anything. It's not waterproof, but it's still pretty heavy work. Okay, so planking arrived December 17th on the 2019.
Just want to put in real quick. This planking also was basically a specific order of wood from a local wood supplier that does a lot of global in the global market called Eden Saw Woods. But yeah, we had to wait for this stuff too because it was being, I think it was milled in Germany.
Germany or
I
France.
think it was milled in Germany if I remember right. And these pieces are 38 feet long, and as you can see there, that one's probably 5 feet across at the butt. So again, it was another issue of finding the resources to do a project of this size, even as a modern problem.
And then we did, because it was inside our buildings, we didn't have to set up scaffolding. We used a lot of forklifts and these scissor lifts. We had a little scaffolding at the end of the boat and a little scaffolding at the beginning of the boat at the bow, which just helped us be efficient. As we planked the boat up and down, we could adjust ourselves. We didn't have to like stop and take down scaffolding. Every piece of wood we put on the boat, we took a piece off, so that was enough without having to have an extra scaffolding. There's not a lot to say about these pictures. I just really like them. And every planking is really fun because like at the end of every couple days, the boat looks completely different than it did. And, so it's fun. So then when you put the last plank in, it's called the shutter plank. So put the shutter planks in February 28th. So basically 2 months of planking. And then it's really bad for a few days as you fare, because as you put the boats together, the planks are flat on the outside. So then you have to break all those edges, basically put power planes and sanders and smooth the hole to make it round.
Which we knew would be noisy and dusty. So we decided to just dedicate the entire crew to that for a couple.
I think it's like 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, long tiring work, but almost impossible to be around if you're not just doing it yourself.
Yeah. So this is basically where the boat was when COVID hit. It might have been a little bit further along. We started putting at this point. So the boat, this is called the main shear. This is the main deck. There's a little bit more planking to do at the bow end where it's raised. So that was kind of where, so from 14 months, it went from, we were taking the wheelhouse off to this point. Probably as far as boat building, one of the best 14-month runs I think any of us had. And then there are some things we changed on the boat because we know where boats fail and the boat is going to have scientific instruments in it. So instead of putting a traditional lay deck, we're going to be putting a plywood deck on it. And then we ended up, there's an aluminum frame there. Usually the frame, traditional construction, which was built originally, those stanchions that you're seeing would have been frame heads coming up, but we wanted to cover those up so that they don't, that's always the place where water comes in. So then we made aluminum framework to continue the planking top.
This is for the bulwarks, which is, sort of like what you might call the railing, when you're standing on deck, the railing of the boat that Jim's talking about. The stanchions are, essentially the posts that hold the planking on.
Yeah, you can see there's that yellow wood, that's yellow cedar, and Pete and I are making the bulwarks, and then the planking will land on that. So again, this is all, a lot of times we're cutting the old wood bulwarks off and making aluminum bulwarks instead. So it was really fun to be able to stack up lots of nice yellow cedar and then shape it. And then there you can see the plywood deck. So there's two layers of 3/4 inch plywood glued together, and then with a layer of fiberglass over top of that. And then we started, it's called corking. We call it corking on the West Coast. The East Coast will say caulking, and that's putting in cotton first. There's 2 layers of cotton to fill up all the seams, and then you come over with a layer of oakum. So that center picture on the bottom, that kind of brown, it's hemp, twisted hemp with tar, kind of a pine tar oil treatment to it, and that goes up and that fills those seams. Just to kind of give you an idea about the size of the boat, the cotton comes in one pound packages. There's 71 pounds of cotton in the boat, 137 pounds of oakum. Quite a bit of material going in there. And then those tools on the right top side are horsing irons. So so after you thread it in by hand and beat it back, then you come back along, one person holds the horsing irons in the seams. Yeah. And then another person has the beetle, and then they bang on it. And this video is just kind of a look around. Unfortunately, couldn't get the sound to work for you guys, but this was done when they're talking there. So the white painted wood there is original ceiling and build stringers. This just gives you a look around the inside of the boat before we started doing any more work. So anything that's kind of dark is original. So it's pretty cool looking when it was all open like that. Oh, there you go. So the next thing was to start to partition it up and put the bulkheads in. So again, we work it off the loft floor. We laid out a stud layout, and then set up in spile. So you can see those patterns that are upside down at the top of the loft floor on the left are the spilings for the bulkheads. And we would just lay it out and build them up on the floor, and then take them apart and start to assemble them on the inside. There's two frames going in, and the very far back there's another bulkhead being patterned. So now hull's getting pretty close to being finished. We are doing we did all the handrails, which are different than what they were originally, but you're gonna have people on board, so that needed to have a safety rail around it. And they're really starting to restore the house. We opened up the bottom. We were gonna have to bolt it on, hold all the old paint off, replace a few pieces. There you can see that it's got the lifting straps on it there, so you can kind of see how we picked it up.
Yeah.
And then again, here you can see we're using the pictures, the original pictures, and kind of measuring the pictures as best we can from using the port lights and the door openings to reconstruct the fly bridge. And we did the same thing with the name. We looked at the name and tried to paint all that stuff back in as close to the original as we could. Then gets us to December, getting ready to put the house back on.
Yeah, so by now the hull is getting pretty close to being done. It's certainly stable, and it's the shape it's going to be. And the house has been rebuilt. So other than the missing siding at the bottom there, which is the black stripes above the turquoise, we had to leave those off so that we had access to bolt the house back down to the deck structure once it was up there. And it was sort of the moment of truth. We actually attached that frame, the building frame, to the bottom and moved it outside first, and then we had to roll the boat outside halfway. You can see the rolling process here. We got steel plate and heavy walled steel pipes and a bulldozer. We used the bulldozer winch to pull it outside far enough to put the house on. It drops into its home up there. That's a big sigh of relief. And then we rolled the boat back in. Close the doors again. So that was a pretty busy day.
Yeah, that was like a 6-hour, I think it was a 6-hour operation just to get it out and up and in. And then we laid a false deck over top of the plywood. This is just Doug fir, 1 inch thick, that we then just laid it down like so it would look like what the real deck looked like. So that box there, that's all the rubber that went into the decks. So there's like 40 gallons of a maritime deck caulk went in. Then it was back to doing more metal work. We did the metal around the fly bridge, refurbished the original ladders, so those are all real, the new tops on them, fixed the feet where they're roaded out. Started working on the rudder shoe and kind of getting the boat ready to have all of her steering systems put in. Building deck furniture and hatches. It's all hatches were all Sapele and then teak companionway hatch.
And finished cleaning up and then working in the interior.
You can see that's the head window at the bottom left there that still has little bases left from the barnacles on it. And so most of that interior is original. The joinery was still really tight and nice. We didn't want to take anything apart. Really a testament to the quality of the Western Boat Building Company. And then in June 29th, the whole deck and house was complete. And she was ready to go to Snow Boat Building and have her engine systems put in. And despite our best efforts, the word got out and there was a crowd.
But we were quite happy that when we put the boat in the water, the boat was going to be very, very light without any engine, without any systems in it. And we had our local naval architect, give us an estimation of how much weight we should just put in the boat to have it sit, properly on its line so that it would tow well, so that it's in trim when for the rest of the project. And so we took all of the internal ballast, which was a big pallet load of lead bricks, and craned it down into the boat. And when we launched the boat, it sat quite nicely.
Yeah, we had filled the frame bays up below the backbone structures with so there's like 8,500 pounds of cement in it also. So there was, I think, total like 14,000 pounds of lead in that. I don't remember exactly. So that's pretty much it. So I'm gonna do the stop sharing here, so you'll just be seeing us. So if people have questions, I see one there about the boat school students. Boat school, they didn't really help. We did hire quite a few people out of the boat school to come work with us. I was a boat school student, but I wasn't a freshman, obviously. And Pete was a boat school student. But they did come by and do tours, and Pete and I have gone down to the school and given a couple talks on the project. And then we also gave one to the landing school. So, anybody else have any questions, or you going to read us some more, Rebecca?
Yeah, I'd be happy to read you. I'll scroll back a little bit. So the first question is, when will the boat be finished? When can we see it completed? So you saw some nice pictures at the end.
I don't know. It's not in my hands. I don't have to answer those questions anymore. I know they're working on the systems over at Snow, and I think that's a question for Chris Chase. You have to ask Chris.
Yeah, so the boat is now in Ballard in Seattle at Snow and Company, getting, as you all mentioned, getting the engine installed. And it's actually, we're installing a hybrid diesel engine so that it'll be able to run on diesel or on battery power. So the last finishing touches are being done now on the engine and on the electrical there. And we are hoping that the boat will be down here in Monterey this summer. So stay tuned very soon.
When it came into our shop in 2015, I think the projection was 2016. So I don't, you never know.
Yeah. No comment. There's another question. So just curious, how much did this all cost? Was any of the labor volunteer? So maybe just thinking about the restoration that you all did.
I don't talk about other people's money. So that's between me and my client. There was a lot of, I'll tell you, there was like 30,000 hours of work there. Some of it, a lot of it was dealing with the old boat. Yeah. So
as far as volunteers go, there was
a little bit of volunteer
sprinkled in. It wasn't. We tried to make that an option. Within the right parameters, volunteers can be great, but they can also kind of slow things down potentially. So there was that in mind too, that when we had crew available, we kind of just wanted to do our work, but we did have some help here and there.
Yeah.
Another question, what does the steam box for the frames look like, and how long do they stay hot enough to bend into place?
So we built a steam box for this project. So it was just like 1/4-inch plywood, and it was probably had 2 layers in it. So we actually built it for framing, and the frame we knew would be used for planking. And then so it was probably 2 layers. It's probably like maybe 12 inches by 24 or 28 inches wide. We just made them in sections so we could plug it back into each other. And then, then typically you frame planking stock, you frame an hour per inch. Green oak, it's a little less than that. You can kind of started testing it like a ½ hour per inch. It would depend like on the day what the weather was like. And then the frames we put in the morning took longer to steam than frames we put in by the end of the day when the box and everything was really hot. So I think we steamed probably about
2.5 hours.
2.5 hours
frame. And once we figured out a rotation, I think we figured out that we could install one in the ½ hour, I think. So
yeah,
we could time them when you put them in the box, every ½ hour you put them in so that you went through the right amount of time, but then we have to stay on the schedule.
We did about 8 pairs a day because you do it symmetrically. So you put one in on one side and you go to the other side. You just jump back and forth so that we're not distorting that bending frame. And I think we averaged about 8 a day. One day we did 10 pairs, but the crew was really grumpy at the end of the day. So we just would do 8 and then you'd stop because you have to fasten the frames to free up the clamps and then cut away the old planking and get everything ready next day. So it's about 8 pairs a day. It felt a lot long. I was kind of surprised with this month because it felt like a lot longer.
This is a question from the same person, Mark Crossan. Shutter, aka whiskey plank? ? Yes. Are these the same?
Every plank can be a whiskey plank. Yeah. The shutter plank and the whiskey plank are basically the same. And I think the whiskey plank, for those of you who don't know, is a tradition started by the chief boat builder who wanted to congratulate his crew for finishing a major milestone, but he didn't want to pay for the whiskey by himself. So he told the boat owner that there was this thing called the whiskey plank. The boat owner is supposed to supply whiskey for the whole crew when the boat's planked. And so we hate to do it, but yeah, when you finish planking a hole, you've got to drink a little whiskey.
So I will clarify, the whiskey plank is the last plank when you're replanking a wonder with full hull, whereas a shutter is any plank that is filling a closed, so you can have multiple shutters in a boat, meaning that anytime you are fitting one in between 2 existing planks, that is a shutter plank.
Yeah, it shuts the hull.
Thanks. Yeah, that's great. There's also a question, can you remind us the size of the boat and is it a reproduction?
It is a 77-foot boat that is 20 feet wide, and I don't remember what she draws. Probably about 9 feet. I would not say it's a reproduction, because for me, in my mind, when you say reproduction, you're building basically a new boat that is well, not next, but you're basically building a new boat that is replica of an old boat. For me, there's a lot of philosophical talk that goes on about whether it's the same boat or not the same boat or how it's done. I mean, this is what happened to the Western Flyer. So in my mind, it's the Western Flyer. The house is original. We could have taken the timbers that in my mind, I could have built a new hull to put the real house on there and still be the Western Flyer. But that argument doesn't.
Monterey's Adobes are also historic, but they underwent the same process.
Right, right.
You're still right up there with them.
Yeah, I was just in England and we went down to see the Victory, and they're replacing the teak planking on the Victory, which is on the frames they put in the 70s. She was originally all oak, but there's no doubt it's a Victory. Don't tell an Englishman that it's not the Victory. Any other questions?
Well, there's a lot of enthusiasm and great work and beautiful and things of that nature. Do you want to talk a little bit about the Classic Boat Award?
Oh, sure.
Why you were in England?
Why I was in England. Yeah. So Jan Hyde wrote an article about the shop and about the Western Flyer, and she's got another article that's coming out. She nominated us for the best restoration of a powerboat for any size. So this is a annual event the Classic Boat in London does, and so they have largest, like over 40 sailing boats. It's usually like a Fife or something, and then there's best powerboat on the best new powerboats. And so yeah, we won. So that's the trophy. So we had to go to England to collect it. And we got to go hang out and hobnob at the Royal Thames Yacht Club. And it was really fun. There is a video stream of that whole board on there. And it was definitely the only work boat that was there, but the enthusiasm from everybody about the Western Flyer, it was kind of neat to go to England and know that they're aware of the boat and they're very enthusiastic about the project, and we're interested to hear about the foundation and what's going to happen with the boat. So this is good. It was very good. Well, I think this is a question for Rebecca. Will you chat about what the Western Flyer will be used for?
I would love to chat about what the Western Flyer will be used for. Yeah, so I'm Rebecca Mostow. I'm the education manager for the Western Flyer Foundation. And as we mentioned, the restoration is almost complete, getting the engines all set up and ready to go. And when the Flyer makes it down here to Monterey, our organization will be running research programs, scientific research programs, and marine science and art education programs on the boat. So it's now a research vessel. It'll be chartered as a research vessel and outfitted as a state-of-the-art oceanography small boat research vessel. So there are researchers from Hopkins and the Naval Postgrad School, lots of universities in the area who are pretty excited about chartering the Flyer to collect some unique data about Monterey Bay. And I, the education manager, am excited about being able to bring students out on the boat during those scientific charters and also during other trips. So one of our main goals is to stir students who live close enough to the ocean that it's not very hard to get them out there, but they don't have access to the ocean. So a lot of students who live in Salinas, in Watsonville, when I worked in South Puget Sound, a lot of students who live in Tacoma just don't have access to spending time on the ocean and having these sort of deep experiential education moments outside. So that's the mission of the Flyer Foundation. And we're very excited to get started. I'll just plug that the education program has already started, and we're running programs in classrooms right now to get ourselves ready for the return of the flyer. And I'm going to drop our website into the chat if you want to learn more, or if you have questions about the Flyer Foundation that didn't get answered during this talk, or there were some questions that came into the chat that were really more about the Flyer Foundation, questions about the use of the wood, things like that. Those can go to info@westernflyer.org, and we'd be happy to chat with you about them. Cool.
Are we still on?
We're still on, yeah.
I want to say actually that the whole purpose of what the foundation, what their intentions were to do with the boat, John Gregg in particular being a very easy guy to work with. I respect him a lot, and the foundation's goals have made it very inspiring to actually work on the boat for this length of time. I know not just for Tim and I, but for really our whole company. It gave it a whole separate purpose for such a thorough restoration as opposed to just somebody's private yacht. So I just like to say that actually,
That was pretty meaningful.
that meant a lot to me. Yeah.
And the other thing that was interesting, I think the company that works on both yachts and fish boats, and we've done a lot of work on commercial fishing craft. And so to see one of these boats being rebuilt, that, these boats spend a lot of time at sea. They're amazing vessels. So it was also good to be building a new workboat, or restoring an old workboat to like new condition, instead of it being, the Fifes and the Hershoffs and the really fancy yachts, they kind of have their class, their pedigree and their patronage who take care of them. So seeing this done for a workboat is fantastic. Have this, to know that this design, this Northwest boat, will be cared for and loved going into the future for a long time. That also is, it just made everybody at the shop excited about the project.
Yeah, a little less common.
Are there any more final questions before we close out? I don't know if Andres has any sort of closing, but any final questions?
I guess maybe one. Really great to see you guys again. I'm missing you already, but you're close enough to see you again sometime soon.
Yeah, come by.
I sure will. A question for you, Rebecca. How soon will it be time to think about hearing about the return of the Western Flyer up here to the Pacific Northwest, the birthplace of the Western Flyer in Tacoma, and where it's being restored at Port Townsend and getting its really sexy propulsion at Ballard of all great places. Can you mention, or is it even close to time to talk about the potential voyages both north to the Pacific Northwest, the Maritime Pacific Northwest, and the alternate things we talked about as this project started so many years ago, about seeing the boat also return to the Sea of Cortez, educating kids and inspiring them into the marine sciences?
Yeah, absolutely. So the plan is that the Flyer will be based out of Monterey Bay for about 9 months of every year, and then we'll spend the other 3 months of the year either going south or going north, depending on the year. We'll trade. So the first year that we travel outside of Monterey Bay, we'll go south, and we will go into the Gulf of California and return to many of the sites that made the boat so famous. So we'll return to many of those Log from the Sea of Cortez trips and read Log from the Sea of Cortez while we're out there. And the goal for those trips, again, is that we will be doing oceanography research science and supporting local researchers, asking what can this oceanography vessel do for your small nonprofit that's studying the environment of your place, places like that. But then also be able to do education trips out on the boat, bring local students out on the boat and talk about oceanography and the intersection between marine science and art and literature. And then in alternate years, we'll go north. I grew up in Seattle, have spent a lot of time in Port Townsend and South Sound, and I'm very excited for the boat to come back north. So stay tuned. But yeah, alternate years, it'll come north.
Another thing that occurred to me that was kind of neat about this project is the interest of all the people, like you guys watching us right now. We do a lot of our work in a vacuum and don't really see people watching it. And we had, I think when they were doing the videos early, that kind of opened it up for a lot of people to kind of see what was going on. Prior to COVID, we would just let people wander in, and we had a balcony to overlook it, and kind of started seeing the same people over and over. There was a guy who was driving to Eastern Washington, started bringing his apples, and he'd just show up out there, and he would just stand there and watch it. So the interest, and from boat fanatics and fishermen and crickets fans and Steinbeck fans, was just really very interesting to be a part of this project.
People agreed on the movement.
Yeah, you never knew who was going to want to. It was really a great project to be a part of.